Okay, so let's get started. Now I share my screen. Hey, yeah, welcome everyone. It's great to see such a number of people interested in our webinar and the SEEK in general, so welcome. We got a 2-hour slot for the activities of the Digital Health and Computer Tailoring SEEK, which we launched 1 year ago. So it's our first anniversary, first birthday. We are very happy that we got the opportunity to be part of this online conference, and the activities that we planned actually come in 3 parts. So we will now start with a webinar on challenges and opportunities of ecological momentary assessment for health behavior research. Afterwards, we have a 5-minute break so that everyone can get another cup of coffee before we then continue with our annual general meeting, where we will give you an update about SEEK activities that we have conducted in the past year, activities that are ongoing, and also some exciting activities that we have planned for the next year, so stay tuned. And after the AGM, we would like to chat a bit more with you, just enjoy being all together, at least virtually in this room, talk about your ideas for the SEEK, get to know you a little bit better. So let's start with our webinar. The webinar will now start with kind of 2 flashlight presentations where myself and Anders Meek from the Université Libre de Bruxelles will provide 2 case studies and some further insights into ecological momentary assessment. I myself will talk about eating behavior, and Anne will then talk about physical activity and sedentary behavior and how that can be assessed using digital technologies. And the second part of the webinar then will be a guided discussion by Dan Powell from the University of Aberdeen and Tura Stadler from Berlin. So first of all, I'd like to introduce you now to ecological momentary assessment of eating behavior, just to give you a general idea of how that works, some of the challenges that I have encountered in my own work and that other people have encountered when using EMA in that kind of research, just to give you a better idea of what to expect if you would want to conduct such research. Ecological momentary assessment of eating behavior is actually very popular. I mean, I've been using that myself for a couple of years, so I knew that there were some studies out there, but I was actually surprised how many studies we came across when we started conducting a systematic review on smartphone-based dietary ecological momentary assessment alone. So of course you can use other tools, you can use other mobile devices, you can also use web-based questionnaires. But when we looked at smartphone-based dietary EMA alone, we came across more than 100 studies, which is really a lot. And another thing that we also learned while conducting this systematic review, so that's all still work in progress, we're still extracting the data, we're almost done, but I thought I'd share some insights with you, is that the tools that people use for dietary EMA, although it all belongs under this umbrella term, are actually very diverse. Just to give you an idea, first of all, what's usually discussed around ecological momentary assessment is the sampling design that you choose. So around 75% of dietary EMA studies use event contingent designs. That means that the study participant has to start the recording by themselves. So for example, every time they're eating or every time they're having a snack, they have to open the app themselves and start recording. Another option would be to do signal contingent recording, which would mean that participants receive a prompt every so often and then are asked to enter, for example, the number of snacks they consumed within the past 2 hours. Another thing that is quite common is photo-based recording. So in our 100+ studies, around 50%, 45% use some kind of photo-based recording. So participants were pretty much asked to take a picture of their food, usually before eating, often also after eating, to get a better idea of the leftovers. Another tool that is also quite commonly used, not as much, I was actually surprised to only see that in 1/3 of the studies, is a food database. So people have an app on their phone, and that's pretty much like a little smartphone search function of Google, where they can type in what they're eating. For example, I've eaten an apple, and then Apple will pop up on the screen, and they can log that type of food. Or also if they eat something that's a little bit more complicated, like spaghetti bolognese and a side salad, they might be able to find spaghetti bolognese already as one entry in the food database. Sometimes they might also have to look for the spaghetti and the sauce separately and enter both. In 40% of the studies, so you already notice there is an overlap between the different components that can be used. In 40% of the studies, people were asked to provide written descriptions. So usually that's just an open text box, and people would just type in apple or spaghetti bolognese and a side salad. And in 50% of the study's participants were also asked to provide an indicator for the portion sizes. And this also can look very different depending on the study. So some studies would ask people to estimate the weight of the food in grams, which you can imagine is quite challenging for some people. And other studies use common household measures like cups or spoons, or you could even use your hand as an estimation measure, and I will actually show an example for that in a minute. So there are many more features that you could potentially use in dietary EMA. I just picked out some of the most popular ones. And I thought to just give you a better idea of how a dietary EMA might look like, I just dive into one of my own studies and use it as a case study. In that particular study, we looked at associations between the colorfulness of the meal and vegetable consumption or healthiness of the meal. And this study used an event contingent design. We used photo-based recording, and additionally, participants provided a short written description of what they've been eating. For this particular study, we used a commercial software called Movisense. Some of you might already be familiar with that. This is a software that's currently, unfortunately, only available for Android phones, and you have to pay for it, so it's not free. And when you buy the software, you get access to a web-based backend where you can program different questionnaires, and the participants can then download the questionnaires on an app on their phone. And then it looks like this, that people can just reply to different kinds of questions. Sorry for that being German. This is actually the question asking people to provide a short written description, and then they can just type it in here with the keyboard on their smartphone. And as I already said, participants also took pictures of their food, and here you can see some nice colorful examples of how that looked like. Overall, in that data set, we had 80 people who recorded their lunch meals only across a 3-week period. And in total, they recorded 1,210 lunch meals. Now, of course, the big question is, what do we do with the data? So as you can see, people did not provide like any really quantifiable input. This is nothing that you can take and put into an ANOVA or a regression analysis. It does not work. So we had to process the data further before we could use it. So we had, first of all, to develop a coding manual. And this manual was then used by a number of trained raters who used the coding manual and the picture data and the description data to code the food groups and the number of portions that people consumed. And here you can see an example for this nice hand-based measure that can basically be used either by coders or also by participants themselves if you want to have a quite easy measure for portion size. So for example, one portion of bread or a bread roll would be just one handful of bread. So after data has been coded, we finally had something that was like some quantitative data that we could then use. And another challenge for researchers might be to actually analyze the data well. because you end up with a lot of data and you end up with nested data. So as you could see, participants reported multiple meals, and what you would then usually use as a way to analyze this is multi-level modeling. This is also what we used here, just to give you two brief ideas what you can do. So on the one hand, of course, we were interested in studying the relationship between the colorfulness of the meal that people also provided in the EMA recording, and in this case, the proportion of vegetables in the total meal. And if you use R, you can get really nice graphs like this. So we basically got one regression line for every participant, and then the big bold black line going through here is like the mean regression line across all participants. And as you can see, there was a very nice positive relationship. The more colorful the meal was perceived to be, the larger the proportion of vegetables in the total meal was. But what we then also did in that data set is that actually was an intervention study. So in the second week of the study, participants received a prompt to eat a colorful lunch meal, and we could then also test the intervention effect. You can also do that using a multi-level modeling. I did not put the individual regression lines in here. That would have been a bit crowded, but basically we did just the same thing, compare the intervention effect also between people, and we found that in the baseline week where people did not receive the prompt, they eat a little bit less vegetables compared to the intervention week with the prompt. And the opposite was true for dairy, actually, which we didn't really expect, but people just, yeah, consumed a bit less dairy. I mean, it's quite wide, kind of makes sense to maybe substitute this by more colorful vegetables. And another really interesting thing that you can do here, and I know that Dan and especially Turo know way more about that than I do, is that you can also see if like the regression slopes differ between people, and interestingly in that case it did not. So independent of the person that reported the meals, the intervention effect was comparable, and that was also very nice to be able to look at that. So as you can see, I really like these kinds of studies, but of course I have to acknowledge that it's not always easy. It's not easy on the researcher side, but it's also not always easy on the participant side. So what are some of the potential challenges that we've explored with people or that people have reported back to us? First of all, you have to be aware that, especially when you're using event-based design, so tracking is not always possible. In certain situations, for example, if people are at work and they're not allowed to use their phone, they might not be able to record what they're eating. So you need to work around that, or at least you need to be aware of that. Other social reasons might be that people might be embarrassed to take a picture of their food or to report their food or to rate their food, and that they might also get actual negative feedback from people they're eating with. A typical parent-child interaction could be, oh, now put your phone away, we're eating now. So yeah, that might also impact the data and also the willingness of people to take part in these kinds of studies. Then, of course, as always, there might be technical issues. So maybe the app doesn't work well on the participant's phone. We've actually experienced some technical issues during that intervention study, that some people did not receive the reminders, which was really bad for us. And we only found out afterwards. Other technical issues could be that the phone ran out of battery, so people were not able to record the meal. It's also bad. And then there are also challenges that come with certain of these meal recording feature choices that you make. So, for example, the food database, if it's too large, people might have difficulties finding the correct foods. On the other hand, if it's too small, people might not find the food that they're eating, and both things are bad, both things are annoying, and might reduce the willingness of participants to continue reporting their food. People might also have difficulties determining the portion sizes, or they might simply think that tracking is too time-consuming or effortful. Some challenges for researchers, just to go over that very, very briefly. I already said we had to buy the tool, so there are financial costs. You might also want to provide participants with the phone. That also costs money. And of course, it might also indirectly cost money because you need people to monitor and to supervise your participants. And another challenge comes with the validity of the collected data. So on the one hand, there may be underreporting because of all these difficulties that participants experience and more that I've already talked to you earlier about. So this is one quick example from a study, from the same intervention study with 80 people. They were recording lunch meals. If every person eats 1 lunch per day, we would expect 80 recordings. As you can see here, these were the recordings that people made. The white spaces basically not recorded when they were supposed to. So what really happened there, we don't know fully. We got some hints, and I will just briefly show you. So these somewhat lighter grain area here is meals that were not recorded in the moment, but people had the opportunity to report them later on. So that might increase the number of meals that you get. And another very important thing, people may just not eat lunch, which is the light gray area around here. And then as a last point, you have this whole issue around measurement reactivity. So people might just change their behavior because they're recording it. That's an issue that we generally observe, but of course this is also an issue in these kinds of recordings. Nonetheless, I think dietary EMA has lots of opportunities. You get all these nice pictures, you see what people are actually doing in real life and in real time. And that might actually be very different to what they report in questionnaires. It provides you with very rich data sets. You can study what people eat, how much they eat, why they eat, when they eat, etc. And you can study many different research questions, such as, of course, the food intake or eating patterns, but you can also test effectiveness of interventions while they are happening, examine influencing factors and outcomes, and many more. So I'll leave it at that. I would also suggest that we jump right into Anne's presentation and then take your questions with us to the discussion session in the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. I will try to share my screen, but I think you first need to...
Yes, I just stopped.
Okay. Okay, let's see if this works. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so thanks, Laura, for a good overview of EMA. That helps me a bit with not having to do the general introduction also. And we will see a lot of these issues coming back in the case of physical activity and sedentary behavior. I will first briefly mention why we chose to do EMA in the study of physical activity and sedentary behavior, and then also explain how we went about it, how we designed our EMA study, and then give one example of a research question we have to give you an idea of what kind of research you can do with this EMA design, and then discuss some opportunities and challenges. So first of all, why did we choose EMA for our research? We wanted to see what could influence sedentary behavior and physical activity in a working age population in a daily life setting, and also to find ways to change these kind of behaviors and what influenced them in an intervention. We know that sedentary behavior, which is sometimes also referred to as sitting time, and physical activity, which includes various forms of movement, so it's not restricted to sports, that these kind of behaviors differ by time. For example, what you do on a weekday and on a weekend day is very different in your time spending pattern. And also that what influences these behaviors differs by context. For example, enjoyment may be a factor when you do physical activity in your leisure time or for leisure purposes, but it may not be a variable that is important when you do household chores, for example. Similarly, for sedentary behavior, it differs by your transport. If you're doing sedentary behavior during transportation, if it's in a working context, if it's in a leisure context. So these behaviors are very time and context dependent. If we want to investigate what influences these behaviors over several times, over several types of contexts, if we want to do this in a cross-sectional survey, we end up with a very long list of items, which creates a high respondent burden. And also we're asking quite a lot of introspection of participants. For example, if we want to ask them, do you sit more after you've had a stressful day at work if you're fatigued? This requires quite a bit of introspection. It's also something they're not experiencing at that time, so we introduce a bit of retrospective bias there. Often we have correlates, for example, emotions that moreover change within one day. And often we're also interested in kind of like time sequence of events. For example, is it fatigue that leads us to sitting, or is it the sitting the whole day that leads us to being not feeling well, being a bit stressed out, fatigued, and so on. And these are the kind of questions that we were interested in and that also we could study with EMA, which is, as Laura already mentioned, an intensive form of survey sampling multiple prompts per day over several days. One of these, an example of a research question we had in this study was, for example, we know there's a vicious cycle when people have physical complaints. For example, they have pain, they have discomfort. They will start to worry, they will start to fear that if they move around a lot, the pain will increase. They will avoid moving around. They will actually sit more and avoid physical activity. And this will further contribute to discomfort and pain because of bad positions, because of poor blood circulation. This was one of the research questions that we wanted to answer in this EMA study. Is experiencing physical complaints associated with more sitting time? And is this association moderated by negative effect, for example, fear, or positive effect, for example, optimism? How did we go about designing our EMA study? Just on sampling, we did a random sampling based on a civil registry of quite a lot of adults in a working age population. And we sent out a time-based EMA, so what Laura referred to as a signal contingent EMA. So what we did was we divided the day in 3 time periods. We had morning, we had early afternoon, and then late afternoon and evening. And within these 3 time frames, we at random sent them a message. So one day could have been at 9:30, 2:30 and 6:30, and the next day it would have been at a different time to get a good distribution of different moments across the whole time frame. We did this during 14 days, so people were asked to complete this during 14 days, and we asked them to respond within 30 minutes. We used kind of like a homebrew solution. Instead of using a designated tool for EMA, we programmed the survey link in Question Pro, and then we sent the survey link via a messaging service, MessageBird, and you actually see an example of what it looked like on a mobile phone on the left. We had face-to-face explanations on the study, so people were briefed on the procedure, and as an incentive, we told them we would give them personal feedback, and they could also enter a raffle. So what were the questions? What did it look like when people would open the EMA? The first question would be, what were you doing when you were receiving the prompt? It was open-ended. And then we were asking, how were you doing this? I was doing this while I was standing, while I was walking, when I was running, and so on. A whole list of either any kind of activity-related behavior. We also asked them who they were doing this with, where they were doing this, how much they, what their experience was with the activity, whether they felt they were good at it, whether they liked it. And then a list of common physical complaints that they rated on a scale and their feeling at that time. At the moment, I'm feeling cheerful, relaxed, and so on. We combined this with a continuous measurement of activity-related behaviors, which were measured in a Fitbit, Charge 2 that has a heart rate measurement also. And this Fitbit was also worn during 14 days. Why did we choose a Fitbit? Well, we wanted to have something to increase compliance during these 14 days that would provide a lot of user comfort. We also were interested in sedentary behavior, sleep, and physical activity. So we wanted a tracker that was valid across these 3 behaviors. Although it might, there might have been, for example, better tools for one of these behaviors. On the whole, for these three, this was a good option. And we were interested in having the possibility to have very detailed data. So we wanted to have a tool that would allow us to program an API so we had access to minute-by-minute data. Some of these minute-by-minute data were then calculated into daily levels, and we considered what people did during one day as the minutes between time getting up on one day and the time getting up on the next day. As Laura also mentioned, you get kind of data that's nested, so you have to take this into account. And for the example that I will show with sedentary behavior and physical complaints, we analyze this for the moment at a daily level. And so we have two levels, the day level that is nested within persons. But if we consider all the EMA data, of course, we have three levels. Also, the moment is in there. We had, unfortunately, a low response rate, only 4%, and the majority of our sample was higher educated. It took a little less than 3 minutes to complete the EMA. The large majority of the EMA was fully filled out, so we had a high completion rate. But when we looked at how many of these EMAs were actually filled out on time, so within the 30 minutes that we asked them to, it was quite a bit lower. Moreover, what we see, if we look at the graph on the right, is that we do see a drop after 4 days. So when we're taking into account what is completed well and what has been filled out on time, we see a drop in usable data after 4 days. Just to give you an idea of the example of the research question, what did we find? So we analyzed negative affect and positive affect models separately because these types were highly correlated. And we analyzed this for each physical complaint separately. Only the model on pain and positive affect showed significant associations with sitting time. Quite surprising, more pain was associated with less sitting time. It may be that people were using activity rather than sitting to distract from the pain, but it also may be that if they had been sitting less during the day, they were actually experiencing more pain in the evening. And this is where an analysis at a momentary level can give more insight. So this is something where we see that doing EMA studies can give you a lot more insight in these kind of detailed patterns, not shown in these analyses here. We also saw that higher positive affect was associated with less sitting time. So what did we learn from this experience of doing the EMA, and what are kind of things that we would change if we would do it again? Well, one thing is that it's very important to have your questions, of course, with a high content validity, and also to reflect very well on the order of your questions. Questions that you include in your EMA have to be short, they have to be clear from the very first moment, and it has to be something that varies within one day. If it doesn't vary, it's better to ask it, for example, in an evening diary or in a survey that you take upfront. For example, we did some pilot studies, some cognitive interviews on our questions in the EMA, and when we noticed that some of the questions were quite confusing, and this is extremely important to check upfront. There's some guidelines in this paper that I mentioned here, and there's also quite a nice open science item repository where you can find some examples on EMA items if anybody's interested in getting started. What we would definitely change is to start with what changes the most. What is most variable of all the variables, of all the items that you want to ask? So when we designed our EMA items, we wanted to make it like a logical, so what are you doing and how are you doing this and where are you doing it? But when you come to the questions on affect, how are you feeling right now? That might have changed already after filling everything out because you've been going through kind of a story, you've been taken out of the moment already. And so I think it's important to start with what you think would change the most during filling out. We used kind of a homebrew solution with our survey system and our messaging system to save a bit of money upfront, but it definitely did not save us any money overall. So we would definitely choose a designated EMA tool if we would do this again, because our solution did not allow to deactivate the link, and we did not send any reminders, which meant we had a lot of data cleaning to do. We had to double check everything if it fit within the time. We also had a lot of lost data. And we think that because people might have noticed that the link was still available after 30 minutes, we might have, without meaning to do so, maybe reinforced non-compliant behavior. Maybe they thought it was okay to still reply after 30 minutes. There is a Twitter thread that has an overview of EMA tools that can be quite useful. Another thing that we would do instead of having 14 days consecutively is use burst methods. We noticed that after 4 days, our usable data went down a bit, and so we would introduce a break and then start again with a number of days of data collection. What did we think that worked well? The fact that we explained to people why we needed several moments per day, why we were collecting data so often, and also we provided them personalized feedback that used all this data. So we gave them, for example, we showed them, this was a day that your day was more in line with health recommendations. This is what you did on a healthy day. This is what you did on an unhealthy day, to give people more insight in their own behavior. This is something that we felt worked well. And then, of course, what is the opportunity of EMA? As I mentioned, when we look at the analysis at a daily level, it raises a lot of questions, but what comes first? And what if we look at not just average time of sitting, but prolonged sitting? What if we take into account whether people are sitting on the sofa watching TV or whether they're sitting behind a computer? These are the kind of questions you can drill down to at a momentary level with your EMA data that, for example, would not be possible if you're just using daily diaries or you're using cross-sectional surveys. So you have with EMA a very rich data set. It remains very important to have very clear research questions, of course, because otherwise you get lost in a multitude of data. And that concludes my talk. So maybe I'll give the word back to you, Laura.
Yes, thank you so much for that great overview and a really nice case study. I would suggest that we move on with the discussion prepared by Dan and Turo. And there were a couple of questions in the chat. We'll maybe leave them to the end just in case that maybe Dan and Turo wanted to touch upon them anyway. I think there was one question also related to EMA tools that I know very nicely answered with this great Twitter thread. So yeah, I'll hand over to Dan and Turo.
Hello.
Turo, shall I I'll just quickly give a few comments about the two talks and then maybe hand to you. Is that all right?
Yes, perfect.
And then we'll share the slide that we prepared.
Perfect.
So first off, I think both talks were great. I think it's really, really great to see firstly, two really good examples of using EMA for eating behavior on the one hand and for physical activity on the other. Both gave really good detail about the methods being used, and I think when I do my EMA studies, I quite get lost in the kind of what I might call the nerdy aspects of like how long it takes people to respond to items and things like that. And I liked it in Anne's when we had the average level time taken to respond, but you can go even deeper than that and start looking at particular items and be like, well, people seem to be hanging around on this item. Why is that? What kind of people hang around on this item? You know, you can get a little bit lost in that sort of thing, but I find that absolutely fascinating, and it's good to see that people are thinking about these things. Laura, in your talk, I was surprised. I was surprised how the percentage of studies that use photo-based, and I guess that leads me to a question, if you wouldn't mind me asking quickly, is what was the denominator here? I mean, how did you define an EMA study, and was there a year span that you were looking at?
Yes, so first of all, we started out with looking at EMA studies in general, and then we ended up with thousands of hits. And then we decided to narrow it down to smartphone-based assessment. So basically every assessment that is conducted on at least daily basis, but I think there was only 1 or 2 studies that kind of used a daily food frequency questionnaire approach. So they just had one basically evening questionnaire and asked people to input everything. Most of the studies either had an event contingent sampling design or some sort of time-based sampling with at least 2 prompts per day. But yeah, we wanted to be very inclusive because we really wanted to get an overview of what is out there. I think most people, they have an impression. So, I mean, I mainly use photo-based recording. So I knew that, of course, we did a lot of studies on that, and a couple of other groups are using that too. But I couldn't really pin it down, like what is actually the most popular tool, or is there even a kind of prototypical EMA tool? And I think what my main takeaway point from the whole review at that point is no, there is not. And that, of course, has many implications on the data that we're then talking about in the end. So, yeah. Thanks.
And I mean, I guess the issue of what the denominator was in that for those percentages is an interesting one, because I mean, Tura and I have often discussed about what an EMA study actually is, and we're doing a review with some people in the Olga and Dom and Jan and Felix about ecological momentary assessment, and one of the first challenges we had was like getting a mutual understanding of what an ecological momentary assessment study actually is. Like, I think the arguments that Tura and I usually have is that I'm far more intensive, like things that are like very finely assessed, whereas Tura can sometimes be wider, and other people I know are the same. As where does an EMA study start and begin in terms of its definition? I think is an interesting argument that we could probably sit here for an hour or so discussing. But yeah, I found the 45% level really fascinatingly high for the photo-based. There's obviously challenges around that type of assessment in terms of people remembering to do it, and I thought it was really cool for you that you went over that. And your study, brilliantly explained. I really enjoyed it. The use of the Fitbit is an interesting one. I worry a little bit with Fitbits that we don't know what the algorithms are that they're using in the background, right? And I guess there's nothing stopping them changing them mid-study without you being told. Do you have any insight as to kind of any control you can have over that, or is that something we just have to live with?
Yeah, we don't really know which kind of cut points they use. As we, in a research grade accelerometer, we have decisions that we can make ourselves on what kind of cut points they use. And it's a bit of a weighing of your alternatives and what your pros and your cons are of using accelerometers where you have more control over how things are calculated, or using commercial tools where you have no control about that at all. And for us, it was the fact that we would have to have them wear it day and night for 14 days. The compliance was more important than having this control. And moreover, the Fitbit, even though we have no idea how they calculate it, it's been shown to be quite valid against research grade accelerometers in several studies. So we decided that we would let our OCD drop a bit, and we decided it was good enough. Yeah. One other thing maybe is that, so sometimes people might worry about a bit of reactivity that you might get also with a Fitbit, because you can actually see what you're doing as a respondent. So the first 2 or 3 days, you might actually see that people are increasing their physical activity because you can see what is on your tracker. And there are some other options that are, for example, the activity trackers do not show this to respondents, and they're just as well user-friendly. But then, of course, yeah, you might have actually people who are participating because they get this feedback. And if you would use activities who don't show this kind of immediate information, you might lose some people there also. I think there's always pros and cons, unfortunately, in the choices we make. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You know, and again, I think the comment you made about maybe asking the most variable questions first was also an interesting one. I've not really thought about. I mean, we did I had a question from someone on one of our courses about where, you know, how do you decide what order in which to present? And we did kind of think about, well, my answer was, well, you probably do. It was kind of the same as yours, really. If you're going to have a timestamp on an assessment, you want to have that, especially if you've got a sensor alongside that, because you want that timestamp to be attached to the most momentary thing you're measuring, right? And if it's going to be different in 2 minutes time, then you want to ask it first. That's really nice and useful insight, I think. And I don't know if two of you thought about that in the past and would concur.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have had the same experience, that kind of like, so basically if you put anything that is easily colored, light affect, yeah, so later in the survey, that's always a problem. And things, for example, have you been sitting down and for what reason and so on, we can still remember. Yeah? So there is also kind of like a cognitive explanation why we should do this, the ones that are very reactive, like first, and then the ones that are easily remembered and salient, or also behaviorally anchored, maybe later. So yeah, so that should actually, I think that is a very good choice and a very good recommendation.
Yeah, I think.
For example, we asked, where are you when you were doing this? Well, a minute later, you're probably either still going to be in the same location, or you might remember where you were a minute earlier. But yeah, these kind of things where how do you feel that can change from 1 minute to the other.
Yeah, Tura, did you have anything you wanted to add on the talks, or shall I get our slide up and we can...
I think, well, we could start with the slides because we have 13 minutes left, right?
Yeah,
and so we had, although I would love to discuss more about the talks themselves, but probably to give a little bit of a wider perspective is a good idea as well. I love the talks, by the way. So I have seen Laura's already. Apologies that I missed the first part because I had trouble getting on Zoom today. I don't know why.
So I was having a problem finding the screen. Here we go. So we only have one slide really, but obviously there's lots of things we could talk about in terms of challenges and opportunities for EMA, for health behaviour research, and we've basically picked out 3 options, and we'll talk about them in a second, that we think are where there's most room for improvement, essentially. And Tura, did you want to start with the first point?
Yes. So, well, one thing that we always discuss is kind of like missing data and how to treat them. And in Anne's talk, there was a very interesting type of missing data, which is kind of a low response rate, right? So, but that, well, so which makes us like really question, like, or at least ponder, like, so who is participating in these studies? Yeah. But once we are getting them to participate, so we want to do everything we can to prevent missing data. And I think, for example, Anne's choice to use a consumer device that is very comfortable to wear is one way to do this. But the other one, and also kind of like to explain to participants why it's so important to do these kinds of intensive assessments. Yeah? So why do we need this frequency, and why is it important to respond relatively quickly, and then also to really ponder. And this is kind of like where Dan and I constantly have this discussion. Yeah. So usually kind of there is a response fatigue happening. Yeah? So if we ask at very convenient times in the morning and the evening, or just once per day in the evening, we can keep going for much longer, for even weeks. We just did a study over 5 weeks, and it wasn't really a problem that participants were keeping up, basically kept participating. But as soon as you switch to EMA, that's usually a problem. And like the maximum I've seen where you get, where you have an EMA design with several prompts a day is kind of 7 days, right? And then often weekends are different. So you try to sample those. So for example, 4 days would be probably not ideal, right? Because, or at least you want to have at least 1 or 2 weekend days in there, so that you get a good sense, because weekends are for many people very different from weekdays. So there's lots to really, so lots of ideas have been put into preventing missing data. But then also, and what I think is quite important, is understanding the reasons for missing data. Yeah? So why do people stop answering after these 4 days? So is it that that the diminishing returns of what they're hoping to get out of it, or what's going on there? Yeah. So a thorough analysis of why we do have missing data is actually quite informative. And so in a way, I think in the EMA and in the general area of intensive longitudinal studies, one really interesting thing would be to really look at providing responses as a behavior, and what drives that, and how can, and basically use a whole arsenal of behavior change techniques to improve that. Yeah? So basically to get people to answer our prompts. Then we had the interesting case, especially for physical activity data, but for lots of other types of data as well. What cutoffs do we define at the person level and the day level? And so and these are often very arbitrary, and between different measurements or between different variables, it massively varies. Yeah, for affect, for example, we would take anything we can. There are no cutoffs. For physical activity, we say we require at least, like, let's say 6, 8, 10, 12 hours a day of each participant, and only then is that day valid for the participant. And we require at least, let's say, 4 days, because weekdays and weekend days are different or so. Yeah? For physical activity, we have quite elaborate cutoffs at the person level and the day level, but then so they seem also quite arbitrary. And I think so we would need to have a discussion about that as a field. Do you want to add something on that, Dan?
Not really. I mean, well, maybe just a quick add to that. I mean, we Turu and I are both members of Society of Ambulatory Assessment, which maybe some people in the room are also members. And I remember they had there was an email kind of round, people asking each other what cutoffs they were using for person level and day level. And this was maybe about 3 or 4 years ago now. But the astonishing thing was that people were using all sorts of things. So if someone doesn't respond to, well, they respond to less than 50% of the items, they're just discarded entirely. Or it might be 80%, or it might be 60%, or it might be 40%. People were just doing totally different things with no consensus. And essentially the justification was, well, that's just what we do. And, you know, I think we need to be better than that. And I mean, I think Turu and I would be more in the camp that you should never discard anybody, regardless of how many assessments they've missed, because the act of doing that in itself introduces bias. So there's pros and cons to the decisions you make, but it's important that we have good science underpinning that decision making, I guess.
And we know, for example, as a behavior, right, that non-response is kind of like more frequent in lower SES, lower education, lower resources, sicker people, more stressed out people. Yeah. So by losing those, especially in health psychology, we lose actually the people that probably need our studies and interventions the most. Basically discarding those. Like, so for example, we saw higher dropout and non-response levels in adolescents who had a lower socioeconomic status. Yeah, so we really want to keep those in the model. So a better way to treat these missing data is then to really analyze the missingness. So basically give it a 0-1 code, like, so the day or the time point is missing or not, and then add all predictors of missingness to your multi-level model, and then and only then does this multi-level model kind of give you an unbiased view. So that would be quite important.
I'm just very conscious of time now. I just looked at the clock, so I'm going to motor through this so we have at least some time to answer the questions that are in the chat. So the second point is that, you know, I think we need to be careful not to give objective measures a free pass in terms of validity and reliability. I see I think I would say in health psychology we have a tendency to give our self-reports really big hard time, and, you know, look into their psychometrics and question their validity quite strongly. But sometimes you'll see that, well, we've measured physical activity using an objective measure, full stop, and not much about its reliability and validity. And I think often these measures are validated in strict conditions, but how valid are they outside in the wild? I mean, we get these very nice timestamps for in digital health, which is great. But I mean, so one area of research I've worked in the past is using salivary cortisol and in an EMA study, and the problem with salivary cortisol is it's so sensitive to time that any deviation from protocol has a massive implication for validity. So I think sometimes we need to be careful not to give objective measures a free pass just because they're apparently objective. We need to be able to detect non-adherence to EMA protocols, and we need to understand those reasons for EMA for non-adherence. And lastly, I think the future is all about developing consensus on a lot of these things. We've already talked about cutoffs not having any consensus. You know, generally how to deal with missing data. There is some consensus, but people aren't really following that consensus a lot of the time. And open science is the solution to a lot of our problems in EMA, in that one of the issues we have is that we as researchers have a huge amount of researcher degrees of freedom in an EMA study, both in the way we analyze it, the way we clean the data, the way we process the data. There's so many steps before you even get to modeling it, where we need to decide about our cutoffs. We need to decide about how we're going to process this data and clean it before we actually do the analysis. And I think I'm going to stop there before we run completely out of time.
Right, and then maybe so probably one of the solutions to some of the issues that we've been talking about could be developing more consensus processes on these topics, right? And definitely use open science principles. Basically, post the code that you use for data cleaning and also for missing data treatment and for your main analysis. So that would be the minimum, kind of like to add that to the paper, so others can cut the data a different way. Or can use a different missing data algorithm if they want to, and then ideally we would also pre-register that, and then if we already have it all sorted out, and then just make adjustments to that, right? But we had lots and lots of questions in the chat as well, and they were super exciting. Like, so how are we going to do this, Dan? Like, so shall I just read out some of them?
Yeah. While you're hunting them down, I think it's important to say that the Leuven group have developed a template for pre-registering an EMA study, which is actually pretty good. You can get, I probably should have had the link available, but I'll find it whilst Turu's answering a question maybe, and post it in the group. But it's I think it's important that we start doing more of that in EMA studies. Go on, and Turu, what questions do we have?
So one is definitely like, so how can we work better with technologists, so with computer scientists, so that so they have very different ways of reporting. Johanna asked that, of reporting their data. I think one of the things is kind of like to try to integrate in EHPS, but also the Society for Ambulatory Assessment or other conferences have been trying to do that, kind of invite more interdisciplinary researchers to our panels, yeah. So or do a panel discussion, or also maybe do symposia or talks. So I think that could be one possibility, and to educate each other, because the computer scientists often also use very small samples, yeah. While we are tending to have more moderate sized samples, and sociologists really want to have thousands of participants, and epidemiologists, right? So there we need to also start to talk a bit more, I feel. Then we had a question on, just quickly check here. So talking about, could passive sensing be the answer? Now, the issue is, like, we do get a lot of missing data for passive sensing as well, yeah? So passive sensing is a convenient alternative, I feel, but it's but only if people wear the sensors. And if there's any incentive, for example, to cheat on it, while, for example, health insurances were trying to have people use electronic pill bottle caps to monitor their adherence, yeah. So basically, then people take out the pill, throw it in the toilet, and that's that, right? So there is, passive sensing does ease participant burden, but it's basically probably also not the silver bullet. Yeah? So, but it's a good way, and then we need to integrate different data streams, yeah, from different passive sensors. Cameras are also, there's a data security issue, well, because we are not only monitoring the person but also their social environment. So they need to wear a button or so, audio recordings or so. So that is a good idea. So I don't know, we probably cannot go longer than 11, right, Laura?
I think we have a bit of leeway.
Oh,
We can
okay.
go 5 minutes over time, and then we'll just speed up. And the good thing is that we will have like these 30 minutes in the end for the virtual get together.
Mm-hmm.
So there is some room. And of course, anyone who would want to continue the discussion after the AGM is more than welcome to stay on and also discuss these matters with us.
So, so we had a question in the Q&A. So are there ways to increase adherence to study procedures? And there's definitely a whole literature on that, but it's mostly, so it's not necessarily in the area of intensive longitudinal studies and EMA, but rather in the survey response literature. So, and for adherence to trial responses. So for example, our colleague Jean Trevic in Aberdeen has done some work on that, and Katie Gillis. And so we can probably take some of these, what they've learned, yeah, so, and transfer it to our areas. In general, kind of more motivated participants who really get why they are doing this, and who also hope to get something out of the study, if they then get what they had hoped out of the study, so they provide more data. So that there is a classic, but anyway, I would think we should launch all behavior change techniques that and all our knowledge that we have about behavior change on this question, because I think at the moment everybody is researching their pet strategy to improve it, but rather we don't have comprehensive multifaceted interventions just yet. So to improve retention and reduce non-response, yeah. So that would be probably quite interesting.
I mean, in terms of the adherence to kind of maybe the things I was talking about, you know, you ask people to do something and then maybe they don't do it in the time when you want them to do it, like taking a saliva sample or completing a cognitive test as you want them to. I think the important thing is to be able to detect that in your data. So there's, you know, you don't want to live in ignorance and be like, well, I asked for it then, I'm just going to assume they did it then. It's like for you know, what I would do in anticipation of the study is to behave as a naughty participant might do, and not do as I'm told, if you like, and see how I can see that in the data that it produces. So in a pilot study, I might, in a cognitive test, mess around and not respond as I should be, and mark down how I was behaving in responding to that test, and then later look at the way in which the data is produced for that event, and then I can use that to clean the data later. So that's what that's my advice on that front.
And the ones, if you have basically Mari and Matti, if you find or someone else had an idea, so kind of like these studies that where there is a random allocation of items within the surveys, they are quite useful. Yeah, so so they really show that it's different where you place the different items, and so if you find the references or later can post them, that would be very good.
I mean, one thing that we could ask is whether
information that
sorry.
So you go, Dan.
I was going to bring something else up. So if we've got things to talk about, then that's what there was the question. I think that there's just lots of room for methodological work in EMA studies.
Yeah.
And, you know, like you mentioned too, we can start doing trials within them, if you like the way in which we recruit people, the way in which we instruct people, you know, and I think thinking about provision of data as a behavior. I mean, in digital health, they do this all the time, right? In terms of engagement with the intervention content or whatever. And we need to do more of that in EMA in terms of how do we encourage people to provide more? What are the reasons why people don't provide data that we ask them for, or maybe in the way in which we ask them to? And then we can, you know, once we start thinking about these things like that, then I think that opens so many more doors for improving our EMA studies. But, you know, just little, you know, there's even small things. I mean, I remember Derek and I and Cheryl several years ago were looking at all the different studies that we'd done, and we all had like different response formats, including how for response scales, and where the indicator starts has a massive influence on the distribution you get. So if you have a device that puts the indicator in the middle, you get a totally different distribution than if you've got a device that puts the indicator that begins at 0. And then if you require that the participant must move it before it moves on, then you end up with a very weird distribution where people very rarely put the score in which it starts. So there's, you know, just little things like that that could help to get rid of a lot of the noise in our data and improve our studies going forwards. But I don't know, maybe it's just me that finds these things interesting.
No, Dan, I find them interesting too. And I know some people on this list who are very interested as well. Yeah. So one very interesting suggestion was also to add a personally relevant question. So Matti just said that there's a group, Günter Schipek's group, they're using EMA and allow participants to add personally relevant questions. And so I think that is one very good way of increasing the value of EMA for a particular patient or participant. And yeah, so that's what. And then of course that it's an idiographic data analysis. For example, if we can say add personal goals, yeah, we can analyze it in that way.
Yeah, I think they do a lot of that in N of 1 studies, right? They, you know, try to personalize it with different items, and you know, provision of some sort of feedback after the study is a good. I found has always been good for encouraging people to complete. And if you can make it personally relevant, then all the better, I would imagine.
Unfortunately, I think I have to jump in here for time reasons.
Yeah, we could go on.
Yeah, I could also, I love these methodological discussions, and that was exactly what led me to starting this big review project. And that has already sparked so many follow-up questions, which is really great. I really hope that we can continue this discussion at one point. And see how we can move this forward. I really liked also the suggestion of finding consensus, because that was another thing that I really learned from the systematic review, is there is no consensus. Like, people do very different things, and in the end we're all talking about dietary EMA, and you can't really compare what people have been doing. So thank you again very much, Dan and Turo, for your very important insights. Thank you also to Anne for sharing your study with us, and for everyone who has posted their questions in the chat. I'm very sure that all 4 of us are available to answer more questions by email, or also if you see us hanging out in the other HPS Zoom conference rooms during this week. So please do get in touch. Please follow also the activities of the SIG if you're interested in these kinds of questions. This is exactly the kinds of questions that we want to target with our activities. And if there is any follow-up activity you would like to suggest based on this webinar, please do approach us. Please suggest a way, and we are very well happy to take any of your suggestions up. Yes, Anne is also the membership officer of our SIG, so if you want to become a member, please get in touch with her. And we now close this part of the SEEK session. We will still do our 5-minute coffee break, and we will we'll be back in 5 minutes for our annual general meeting. You are all very welcome to stay, no matter if you are already a SEEK member or not. It will also just give you a nice overview of what we have been doing, what we will be doing, and there will also be room for your suggestions for future activities. So thanks again very much, guys, and see you in 5 minutes.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Another disadvantage of the Zoom meetings is that we can't really see if people are back in the room or still getting some coffee and biscuits. We technically still have 1 minute left, but we will slowly get ready to continue with our SIG's annual general meeting.
Yeah, it's 11:15 now. So I think it would be good to start. So we have some time left at the end for informal discussion, where we could, of course, promote everyone to panelists so people can turn on their video and talk. Well, first of all, Laura and Dan and Turu, thank you very, very much for organizing and sharing your thoughts in the webinar just now. I would like to tell you something more about the special interest group that we're forming. So I'll start screen sharing right now. Just double checking, can you see it? Perfect. One more thing regarding the webinar, I just asked EC Conferences whether we can save the chat and what was said there, as well as all the links that were shared, and we can. So if people are interested to have access to those links that were shared, please let us know and we can share them afterwards with you. But welcome to our SIG members meeting of this year. It's great to see that at least quite a few people stayed for this session too. Although I know that there's a very interesting session going on at the same time. So thanks for that. We're the SIG in Digital Health and Computer Tailoring, and my name is Eline Smit, for those of you who don't know me yet. So what would we like to do in this meeting? Well, I'll start in a minute by describing to you the meeting's aim, provide you with a little background information of why we actually formed this SIG last year. I'll introduce to you the committee members. You've seen already some of them. Laura and Anne just shared their presentations with you, but there are quite a few more people actively involved. I'll give an overview of the activities that we already employed last year and the things that we're planning to do in the near future. And we'll end this session with a call for contributions, because while the SIG could not exist without the input from its members, and have that followed up with a informal get-together via Zoom. So the meeting aim would be to provide you with an update on the SIG, its activities and its plans for the future, what I already briefly described. And oh, no, my arrow is no longer working. Let me check. There. And to get together and continue to join forces. And that relates to our SIG's mission that I'll get to in a little bit. But first of all, a little background information. Why did we actually form this SIG last year? Well, digital health is booming. The internet is currently the most commonly consulted medium when it comes to health and health-related complaints. And many of the interventions that are available when it comes to digital health are in fact computer tailored and offer individualized solutions for the specific person that is asking for help or advice through such interventions. And fortunately, there is evidence for its positive effects. There is evidence for effects, but also for cost effectiveness. And it's often said that digital health has a high potential for being cost effective. And that's also more and more being shown in research. So there's data to back up that statement. And so far, it has been applied to all kinds of behaviors. It has been applied to help people to improve their lifestyle, but also for adherence to treatment or other kinds of behaviors. And it has been applied to different kinds of target groups, to adults, adolescents, people with, people without a disease, etc. And well, overall, generally speaking, evidence is quite positive. However, at the same time, effect sizes remain small. So, well, we can reach a large amount of people, but the effects that are actually reached within those people are quite small, which, well, gives room for further improvement. So innovative tailoring strategies, innovative digital tools might warrant exploration to improve effects and ultimately, given its large reach, improve the public health impact of digital health. At the same time, as you all know, technology is moving forward, and the new possibilities that digital health tools offer seem unlimited. Think of mHealth, but also data-driven kinds of tailoring, electronic consultation hours. There's a lot of things possible, and more things become possible every day. Well, this background is summarized in a paper that we published last year in the European Health Psychologist. So if you want to read more about why we started this SIG, what its ideas are, please have a look at the paper. But to briefly summarize and provide you with the key message of this paper is that the mission of the special interest group is to build a community of interested EHPMS members to advance digital health and computer tailoring research, and to provide a forum to discuss new evidence, underlying mechanisms and specific components of digital health interventions that may ultimately lead to enhanced behavioral outcomes. And I think, well, for the people that stayed for our AGM, this is probably what you're here for, to discuss what's going on in the field, how to move forward, and to get connected and see if you can join forces with other people that are as enthusiastic about this field as you are. Well, to introduce you the committee, first of all, here's our communications team consisting of Alexis and Camille. And they are, for instance, responsible for our quarterly newsletter. So they've been working last year on not only developing the content of our newsletter, but also on developing a very nice, in my honest opinion, layout for this newsletter. So if you're on the mailing list, you've probably seen the result of their hard work in this respect. Then there's our events team, also consisting of 2 people, Olga and Laura, both present here. I see that our logo has cut off a little bit of Laura's last name, but it should be Laura Manhout, of course. And they've been working hard on an event that's planned for this fall. And also they were, of course, planning a very nice social event for the EHPS conference that has to be postponed for a little while, unfortunately. But stay tuned, I'll tell you a little bit more about the upcoming event in a minute. And then there's Anne, of course, who's our membership officer. So she already mentioned it in the chat during the webinar. But if you have any, well, if you know of people that would like to become a member of our SIG or be put on our mailing list, please have them contact Anne. Also, if you yourself are not yet on our mailing list, please contact her, because she's the one keeping track of who is all involved. And there's Katie, Katie Newby, also a little bit of her last name was cut off. I just inserted our logo right before our meeting, so that's my bad. And she is our secretary. So she, every time that we meet, and we meet quarterly as a committee, she makes our agenda, takes the minutes, but also keeps track of all the things that we have on our personal to-do list, so we don't forget anything that needs to be done. And then last but not least, of course, there's Laura, who is our co-chair and a very active social media officer. And I think everyone who's on our Twitter, is following us on Twitter, knows that she is the driving force behind our Twitter account. And I think that effort is really paying off, as you will see by the number of Twitter followers that we have already. And then there's me at the very end, being the chair of this well, very nice to work with committee. Well, there is the result of Laura's effort. We have over 400 Twitter followers already. If you're not following yet, please do so, because a lot of interesting news is shared on this platform. But also, if you have published a paper in the digital health field, please tag us, because then we will retweet your work, and well, you will have at least 400 people being notified of what you've been doing. Our mailing list is a little bit smaller yet, there's 66 members on the list at the moment. But be aware that only members on our mailing list do get the newsletter. So please, if you are interested in reading our quarterly newsletter, please be sure that you're on this mailing list by contacting Anne. So what did we do so far? Well, before we launched our SIG last conference, we sent out a survey among EHPS members to inquire what the activities were that they would be interested in having our SIG do. And these were the activities that were mentioned most. And I'm very happy and proud to say that we worked on all of those in the last year. So I'll go over each and every one of them now. So in terms of creating collaborative networks, we created our mailing list and Twitter account, which I already briefly mentioned, and we will host an annual members meeting. Last year we had our launch meeting, and this is our first annual meeting, and we will continue to have this meeting every conference. Sorry, in terms of organizing symposia or roundtables at the EHPS conferences. What we already did last year was organize a symposium on tailoring digital health interventions, which was led by myself, and had some very interesting talks, most notably perhaps the talk by Santiago, which was given virtually but live. So that might be something that some of you remember. And we just had our first webinar led by Laura on EMA. And I think all of you attended that session. So I think given the number of questions and comments and links that were shared in our chat, I think we can say that that was a success, and people were very enthusiastic and triggered at least to share their ideas with us. And what's coming up is a webinar on adaptive tailoring of digital health interventions. That's the first webinar organized by Olga and Laura, where Dr. Eric Heckler will discuss how principles from control systems engineering can be used to develop and optimize user-centered adaptive digital health interventions. To summarize that, you can already register for this webinar, which will take place at the beginning of October in the evening to make it as convenient for most people. But be sure that if you, well, for some reason don't save this link right now, we will notify you through the EHPS newsletter, but also through our own SIG newsletter. So there will be multiple ways in which this flyer will be sent out to you. Well, in terms of setting up international studies by joint grant applications, I can tell you that we, well, we didn't ask for a grant for it, but we did, under guidance of Laura, set up an international study, which is a systematic review of testing whether there is, in fact, this digital divide that people tend to talk about when it comes to mobile interventions for diet, physical activity, and sedentary behavior. International, because we have Laura and Heide from Germany, Dorothy and Cindy from the UK, Anne from Belgium, and myself from the Netherlands. So this is one of the first things that resulted from our SIG that we're currently running. In terms of writing joint papers, well, it's not a paper, but it was a blog that Laura and I wrote based on last year's launch meeting where we launched the SIG in the EHPS. Well, of course, about the systematic review that we're running, we're also planning on writing a joint paper. Then people indicated to want us to organize special issues, for instance, in the EHPS journals, but also in other journals. And one thing that we did in this regard is send out a call for submissions for a special issue on digital health and computer tailoring in the European Health Psychologist. This was already launched last year. We had quite some abstracts that were submitted, made a selection, and at this very moment, 6 abstracts are being worked out into full papers with a deadline of March 1st. So people have quite some months still to work on that, but we're very excited to see this special issue coming out next year. In terms of distributing a regular newsletter, I already briefly mentioned that Alexis and Camille have been working on this last year. So we have this very nice newsletter starting with the bonjour section, and we try to reflect the international character of our SIG also by the other sections in the newsletter. So if you're curious and are not yet on our mailing list, contact Anne. Here's her Twitter. She already shared her email address with us in the chat function, but you can always also email us at our SIG email address. And then I'd like to end this presentation by giving you a call for contributions, because as I said, the SIG cannot exist without your input. So do you have any ideas for SIG related activities? Are you interested in organizing a SIG related event yourself? Because we would like to emphasize that it's not only the committee that can organize SIG related events, but that also individual or groups of SIG members can step up and organize an event with our help. There's also funding possibilities. So please, if you have great ideas and are interested in organizing something, please let us know, and we can see where we can help in that regard. And of course, if you know of anyone interested in joining our SIG, please let us know where they can find us. Here's again our email address, our Twitter, and please spread the word, because, well, we're after 1 year of having this SIG, still very excited about it. So the more, the better, I would say. And that's where I would start our informal get together. So perhaps, Laura, could you promote everyone that's still here to panelists? Because these are also the 3 things that I think would well, form the basis for our discussion, or at least a start for getting some discussion going. Is that working?
Okay, everyone should be promoted to panelists now, so they had to rejoin the meeting as panelists. But hi everyone. If you want, you can now switch on your camera, and you can also just unmute yourselves and start talking to us. So I start to see some faces here in the sidebar. Do we want to keep up the slides, or do we want to see people's faces instead? I think if we end the presentation, then we can see more people.
Yes.
But yeah, great.
Well, perhaps just keep in mind that the most important things that we would like to hear from you is, do you have any ideas that we could be working on, or do you want to work on something yourself? But also other things related to the SIG, digital health in general, questions that you have for us, please share them. Yeah, so I'll stop screen sharing right now.
There's everyone.
And there is everyone indeed.
Ah, that's nice. It's so nice to see everyone. We're so sad. We had such a nice activity plan to network and to talk to all of you in person. We're really hoping that we can postpone that until next year, and that next year we'll hopefully be able to see everyone again in person.
Definitely. What we also wanted to do is take a group picture, of course, which is a bit
Yes.
odd. Now it's online. But we do want to make a screenshot perhaps in a little bit. So if everyone agrees at least. So if you don't, please turn off your video for a little bit because we might be sharing it on social media. So I don't see anyone turning it off. So I'll take a screenshot right now. Thanks.
Thank you.
So is anyone keen to contribute in any way? Or do you want to share your vacation stories? We could also do that.
Hi everyone, I'm Elif Başak from Istanbul, Turkey. I didn't study health psychology, but I'm very interested in because I studied psychology in my bachelor's and now I'm studying in different departments. But I have some ideas about some innovative ideas that I can use mobile applications for behavior change. So I wanted to be part of this community. This is why I'm here.
Very nice. Welcome.
So do the people that are working on mobile health perhaps want to raise their hand so she knows who to contact in case of any questions? Because I myself have not been working a lot with mobile health yet.
Yeah.
But perhaps others have.
Hello. I do a lot. Yeah. I think next year we should do an activity to let people with similar interests find each other. I think, Anne, were you involved in that? Ispenpar, the E&M Health Sigurd Ispenpar did a really nice activity in 2019, I think, in a conference where it was kind of a bingo sheet and you had to find other people with the research interests listed on the bingo sheet. That was very nice.
Yeah, I remember we had a lot of computer tailoring and mobile health, but we had one on chatbots that really no one was working on. So that one person who was working on chatbots got a lot of bingo kind of box.
Maya and my team's idea also includes chatbots, artificial intelligence, and a little bit mindfulness.
Great, we'll know where to find you now.
Yeah. I think Johanna raised that question earlier, where she's not here anymore, was that question about collaboration with different people from different fields. So Elif, I think you can also provide interesting insights on that. What fields are you working in now? Is that more computer science or health promotion?
No, my current department is called Science, Technology and Society. So it's kind of critical studies for technology and science. So we are discussing how new technologies can affect society, but this is quite theoretical and I wanted to do something more applicable and that has impact. So this is why I want to go back to psychology and especially at health psychology, health promotion and behavior change.
Yeah, I think also then the webinar that Olga and Laura have been organizing for October will be very interesting. I think Eric Hackler also has this very nice connection in his work between behavior change, applied work, but also that technological background. And I really admire his work and I'm very much looking forward to his talk. Maybe Laura and Olga, or especially Olga, I mean, you've been working with Eric, can give a bit more background on what to expect there.
Well, so I think he's got some quite interesting sort of methods of collaborating quite closely with engineers, working on kind of how to employ principles from engineering to sort of first better understand individuals. So it ties very nicely with the EMA session that we just heard about, and then kind of moving forwards to try to tailor interventions at the individual level to make sure that interventions are delivered at the right time and also the right kinds of techniques, and perhaps also with sort of the right message tone or sort of personality and things like that. So yeah, I think it'll be an interesting webinar. I suppose as well, what might be, or what would be very nice is if anybody here has got any sort of pressing thoughts on other types of webinars that they would like to see, that we can try and put on for you. So that would be great if anybody has kind of, if you just want to throw some ideas out there.
Definitely. So if you either have something that you're either studying yourself or that you would like to get into, or also if you know a really good speaker who could provide insights into anything related to digital health, please let us know.
Yeah, well, I myself, but I mean, obviously we talk more often, but what I find really interesting is that the data-driven tailoring that Santiago gave his talk on last year. So I think that links to some extent to what Eric is going to talk about, but more of like what people do online in terms of behavior and how we could tailor based on what they're doing, what kind of searches they're employing, things like that. So that might be something to look into. See if we can get an expert on that to talk.
Yeah, so as you can see, we're really open to your suggestions. I mean, we're a group of 8 people in the organizing committee, so of course we already bring in some different backgrounds, also some different levels of experience, but we don't only want to organize the events for ourselves, but also for our members. Is there anything else that comes to your mind, or also any other activities? I mean, hopefully at one point we'll be able to meet again all in the same room and do some funny networking activities. So if you have any ideas, anything that comes to your mind that you know that other societies are doing or other groups are doing, yeah, please share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and what I also wanted to mention is that well, you might wonder, like, how did these people get on the committee of this SIG, and whether there will be spots available in the near future. And that's actually something that we discussed. EHPS has these guidelines for SIGs, so that this committee should stay more or less at least the same for a minimum amount of 2 years. So we're saying that halfway that term. So we might be advertising some vacant positions on the committee later, well, this academic year, I would say, I think in 2021 sometime. So if you're interested in, well, joining more actively, you can consider applying for such a position by the time. You can also inform us before then already in case you are interested.
Yes. And of course, although like most SIG related activities, like also writing a joint paper, so if I was mainly limited to people on the committee, you are very welcome to use our resources as well. So if you're looking for collaborators, for example, please tag us on Twitter and we'll share your tweet. We will probably also get a proper EHPS mailing list set up very soon. So you will probably also be able to use that mailing list to look for collaborators, to share ideas, etc. So that's also a very important thing. Only because you're currently not on the committee does not mean in any way that you are not welcome to contribute. Quite the contrary, you're very welcome to contribute. And if you say, oh, I have this idea, or I would want to organize something on behalf of the SIG, or I would like to get the support of the SIG, you are very welcome to do that. I think Christina wanted to say something earlier.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, and thanks for the great session. So I was wondering a little, because we're working on a project on safe and digitally supported communication. If anyone of you has any experience with like less concrete behaviors, because obviously eating behaviors are always quite, I find them quite measurable objectively, but
we can now discuss this.
I was hoping we'd do that. Yeah, but we haven't really found the approach for communication, because it's such a subjective measure, and we can't obviously let people take a photo of their food or something. So we would pretty much just working with questionnaires, and the app that we're working on is kind of prompting. It's an app with training lessons, and after a certain amount of training lessons, they're asked to answer certain questionnaires. But I was just wondering if you have any additional ideas on that and so on.
So by online communication, you mean like using social media or WhatsApp?
No, so the project is on communication and obstetrics, and we've provided some trainings for healthcare workers, but also for pregnant women. Sorry, that's my phone going off. And now we're trying to implement this training in a training app. So basically help healthcare workers to communicate with their team members better, safer, but also help the pregnant women to prepare for childbirth and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's actually in our department, I work at the Department of Communication Science.
Ah, good.
Quite some work going on how to promote both instrumental and effective good ways of communication. And also together with colleagues from Maastricht University, where Thomas is also working,
Oh, cool. Mm-hmm.
we developed an online e-learning program for health professionals to improve their communication about smoking cessation. So I'd be happy to talk more about that.
Ah, yeah, that sounds great. Sounds really.
So where are you based?
At Jacobs University in Bremen, in Germany. So can I just send you an email maybe?
Sure.
Or?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah, it sounds interesting.
It is. Except for quite a low budget that we have on this app, but yes.
And the app is targeting both the pregnant women and the healthcare professionals.
Yes, we have different versions kind of the same app that's a little bit adapted to what people need, but it's not very tailored at the moment, I'd say.
Nice, interesting.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Because I noticed Sabrina already left because she wanted to have some time before the next meetings is starting at 12. So
yes,
it might not be a bad idea to end this session a little bit sooner so people can take a little break before the next session is starting.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Yeah, so, thank you for the nice meeting. You also wanted ideas for topics for other webinars, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or other kind of, well, what I would be really interested in would be like diversity in digital health. And I noticed that your systematic review also relates to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I often notice that most digital health interventions only target, or yeah, well, I think they target white, cis, straight people, or that they often exclude same-sex couples, for example, if they target couples. But I don't, yeah, from what I could see, there's not much discussion around this or any papers about this. So it would be nice if you could organize something around this, or at least I would be interested in that.
Yeah. I actually just read, I think it was a dissertation that we included in the IT Dietary EMA review that was specifically focusing, I think, on homosexual and bisexual women. I'll look that up and I'll send it to you, but yeah, that would be the only one out of that over 100 studies that would specifically look into a non-cis straight population.
Interesting. Thank you.
But good idea. I think Laura and Olga are making notes of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think perhaps it would be good to close the session by saying that if you have any ideas that come to your mind after we've closed the session, please let us know via any means, email, Twitter, whatever way. So then it would be good, I think, to thank everyone for being here. It was nice to share our 6 activities with all of you. It was really great to have the webinar. So thanks again, Laura and Anne. for being an active part of that. And we'll see you probably at some other session later this week. Thank you very much.
Enjoy the rest of the conference, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Nice to meet you.
In the next session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.